We'd like to welcome all of you here tonight for this presentation by Theo Wold, and he's getting the computer set up right now, so we'll go ahead and get started. But welcome and thank you for coming out to learn about this ranked choice voting that's going on, or it's in the preparation of being on the election in November. And so they have to do a ballot initiative, and so Theo will talk about that. So we'd like to go ahead and get started. We'd ask Judy Boyle if she would introduce Theo, and then he can go ahead when she gets done. And she can say anything she'd like to say too. So.
Okay, he's working on that up there. Thank you all for being here. And what you're going to hear tonight is kind of the other side of what is incorrectly called open primaries. Theo will explain why they aren't supposed to use that and all about that. So I got to meet Theo this year because he was our new Solicitor General in the Attorney General's office. We've never had that before. A lot of states do have that. And what that solicitor, well, he'll explain that too. What the solicitor does is try to defend our state sovereignty, protect the Constitution, and make sure that the feds don't overstep, which they always do in federalism. So I worked with Theo on several bills. Probably one of the most fun ones was that we did a bill that said no foreign governments could own Idaho water rights, Idaho land, or minerals, ag land. And we didn't specifically pick a country because sometimes our friends turn into our enemies in a very short time. And sometimes our enemies can be allies. It's kind of bizarre how the world works. Theo had told me this was the only law, the only bill in all the states that tried that went on that approach. Some of them just picked specifically China, and I think that's Florida that did that. And so they're in a lawsuit because you can't just pick out one entity. That's unconstitutional. Anyway, so he's been a lot of fun to work with. He worked in the Trump White House doing domestic policy. And unfortunately, he is leaving us. I think he's crazy, but he is going into the military to be an intel officer. So unfortunately, we're going to lose him. Give you a great education tonight. Thank you for being here.
All right. It's one of those things, it's true of Hollywood, it's also true of public speaking. The show must go on, right? So I hope in a second we're going to have some slides for you to see, because the problem with this idea about ranked choice voting is encapsulated in the idea that I can't just explain it to you in plain speech. And for any free citizen, that should be your first red flag. If it takes charts and graphs to explain what's going on, maybe there's more going on than meets the eye, right? Okay, so the place I want to start, and hopefully we'll get this up here in a second, the Oakland Unified School District. Anyone here familiar with Oakland, California? Yeah, it's the paragon of success, thriving community, and the school district is known for being one of those great contributors, both of quality citizens and excellent educational outcomes. For some of you, you'll remember Oakland was most famous for creating a new dialect. You remember that? Yeah. Yeah, back in the late 1980s. They said, well, the real problem here in the school district is we're stuck with this thing called English. It's a real problem. So we invented this new idea. It's incredibly innovative, and innovation's always good, right? That's something you're going to hear a lot from Reclaim Idaho over the next few months. Innovation's always good. So we innovated, we came up with this thing called Ebonics. Remember Ebonics? Yeah. A monumental failure, and there's actually been lawsuits filed by students who were educated under Ebonics, alleging that they've been deprived monetary outcomes and a job placement because of the deficits that they developed in the Oakland City schools. But Oakland is never going to quit on innovation. So what was the new idea that they came up with? Well, they decided that to ensure that there was fair and equitable outcomes in school board races, they were going to get rid of what we call first past the post. First past the post elections is what we have in the United States. What does that mean? Simple terminology. To paraphrase Vince Lombardi, the guy or gal with the most votes wins. Pretty easy, right? Folks in Oakland said, that's not the most equitable. That was a system come up with by a bunch of dead white guys. We're going to do this new thing, and it's called ranked choice voting. Ranked choice voting, or what's called preferential voting by some folks. Now, I'm scanning the audience here, and your descendants, some of you may have come from these places, but I'm guessing here no one is from Sweden or Norway or Finland, any of the places that currently use a form of ranked choice voting. So ranked choice voting is a relatively new concept in the United States. The first jurisdiction in the country to use it was in 2003. And one fact that's often kind of obscured by the proponents of ranked choice voting, especially here in Idaho, is most of the jurisdictions to use ranked choice voting have been cities. And cities of a certain, let's say, disposition. Places like Cambridge, Massachusetts. Anyone here familiar with Cambridge? The home of that extremely conservative institution, Harvard. Santa Monica, which for any Californians is called the People's Republic by the Ocean. Santa Monica, California. How about that place where produces all kinds of great conservative thinkers, writers, politicians, jurists? New York City. New York City, they have ranked choice voting now. So a lot of cities have been adopting it, but Oakland Unified School District said that they were going to adopt this for school board races. So what happened in Oakland? Well, they had the election, multiple candidates running for 2 open seats. And you're all familiar with that, right? You voted for city council races, you voted for school board districts, you can have multiple candidates running, and it's, your votes will be essentially the 2 highest vote getters will prevail. You could have 8 people running for 2 seats. That's fine. We see that under our current system. So multiple people running, but what was different here was voters were asked, and here's your thumbnail definition of ranked choice voting. You enter into the ballot box and you're asked to express, it's a technical term, express your preference for multiple candidates. What does that mean? What it means is you've got to rank the candidates that are given before you. You've got 4, 5, 6, 7, rank them from 1 through 7, 1 through 4. And again, here in Idaho, the supporters of this current initiative will say, well, hold on, you don't have to rank all of them. In fact, that was one of the questions I was asked by one of the members of the Idaho Supreme Court. Well, Mr. Wold, you're saying essentially that people have to rank all of them. And that's not how it works. No, that's true. You don't have to rank all of them, but unless you're a Delphic oracle, or you have a crystal ball, or you've got an inside track on some polling that most voters don't have, in a race like a school board seat, how are you going to know which of the 7 or 4 or 5 candidates is likely to advance to a subsequent round of balloting? Right? Because the point here is you got to engage in some game theory. Game theory, some deep strategic statistical thinking. So what happened in Oakland? People expressed their preferences. The city of Oakland spent a few $1 million educating people on ranked choice voting, and then they certified a winner. And everyone went on their merry way. It was a great success. Victory. See? You conservatives are a bunch of knuckle-dragging dummies. People can use ranked choice voting. No problem. And then they did an audit. Oh, those conservative activist groups, they wouldn't leave well enough alone. there was a discrepancy, a really obvious discrepancy in the total number of votes cast and then the total number of votes that the winning candidate actually received. And the audit revealed that the winner, who was certified and already serving as a member of the school board, and better yet, for a lawyer like me, had taken votes. That's litigation money right there. Taken votes, turned out he was actually the loser. Didn't even finish second, he finished third. And one of the minor candidates who had finished fourth, turned out he was actually the winner. Millions of dollars later in litigation, Oakland Unified School District has sorted out this problem, and the loser became the winner, and the winner went home with no consolation prize. Okay? Let's just keep that in mind. The Oakland Unified School District. Because why do I start there? Yeah, they're crazy. Yeah, they come up with all kinds of silly ideas in Oakland. That was a school district. A school district, albeit a large one, with a few hundred, 200, 300,000 voters. What they're asking you to do is to sign off on a radical change in the way elections are conducted for the entire state of Idaho. They want to innovate with your elections. Okay? So we start there. Now, one of the interesting problems, and some of you still got your hats on, good, keep your thinking caps on, because we're going to do some math tonight, or at least some mathematical theorems. One of the big problems with ranked choice voting is what we call ballot exhaustion. And if I had my slide up here, just follow along. Hopefully we can get a slide up here because it helps to see this. Anyone here a political junkie? You love campaigns and elections? Good, okay, you're all normal. Except for Judy and me. Well, I love elections. I love reading about them. This was one of the things the president loved to do, was like a cocktail party trick. Ask Theo who your member of Congress is and what vote total they got. Doesn't matter what district, what state, he'll tell you. So I was really interested in this special election they just recently had up in Alaska. Anyone follow that? Yeah. Representative Young had essentially represented Alaska in the United States House of Representatives since statehood. Practically. Been there for decades, longer than I've been alive. He died in office, and they had to fill the seat. Okay? And what changed between when Representative Young was first elected to Congress from Alaska and some of the other folks, Senator Murkowski and others, was Alaska adopted through a popular initiative ranked choice voting. All right. And there were some number of candidates who ran for this because it was considered a safe seat, right? If you're a Republican in Alaska, that's a guaranteed employment for life. You know? Get that job in Congress. So there were 56 total candidates that ran in that election. One of them, a couple of them I served with in the White House. Good people, all. You'll remember one of the biggest names that ran. She's a daughter of Idaho. Sarah Palin, right? And some of you who have really great memories, you'll remember a former Alaskan politician by the name of Begich, who died in a plane crash. His grandson ran as well. Nick Begich is a very popular state legislator in Alaska. They were the two leading Republicans. And Democrats played a lot of different games. They've been playing a lot of different games up in Alaska over the last couple of years, with Republicans turned independent candidates who basically run as Democrats, or Democrats who then say they're independents. But they all got behind this woman named Mary Peltola, an indigenous rights lawyer from a very small town in Alaska. No one had really ever heard of her. Okay? So, you got the big showdown. Sarah Palin, Nick Begich, and Mary Peltola. They're pretty much the three leading candidates. Here's a very interesting thing that happened in that first round of ranked choice voting. And just to take a step back here, I say first round, just so we're clear on the terminology, because the way ranked choice voting works is if no candidate gets to 50 plus 1 vote %, then you eliminate the lowest performing candidates, reassign their votes to those that are still remaining, and then you do another round of tabulation until you get to 50%. Now maybe 2 rounds, maybe 3, maybe 4. It was 4 rounds in Alaska. Okay, so what happened in the first round? It's really interesting. And like I said, it's much easier if you can see this on the screen. Nick Begich got 11,000 votes where voters only selected him. What does that mean? They didn't circle Sarah Palin's name. Okay. They didn't circle Mary Peltola's name. They said, I'm voting for Begich and everyone else is a dirty rat, right? Don't want anyone else. Whatever they're selling, not interested. 11,000 voters exclusively selected Begich. Begich did not get to 50% of the vote, +1. In fact, Begich, after the first round of tabulation, was stuck around 23%, and he was eliminated. The next round of tabulation was between Mary Peltola and Sarah Palin. So this is the problem of ballot exhaustion. What happened to the 11,000 voters who said, I want Nick Begich and I don't want anyone else? What happened? The votes were eliminated. They were set aside. Now they will say to you, that's not true, that doesn't happen, but by design, that is how ranked choice voting works. And they answer that objection in the way the system performs by saying, but you chose a candidate that was relatively unpopular. He was a minor candidate. You chose a candidate that came from a minor party. Your second preference, that's still representative of your interests, representative of what you want to see out of this office, except for when you don't select a second candidate. Okay? So that's ballot exhaustion. And this has a really interesting wrinkle. I spoke to the Boise Rotary Club about this recently. They had Luke Mayville, who is a PhD academic from Yale. You can imagine he and I have a lot that we agree on. He's sort of the architect of this initiative. He's the smart guy pulling all the levers. So they had him speak, and then the next week they had me out. And this room is full of doctors, judges, professors at Boise State, all the elites here in Idaho. And ballot exhaustion turns out to be a real problem for people of color. It's interesting. The president of the New York NAACP has called ranked choice voting the gentrification of America's electoral system. The president of the NAACP in DC has said, you're taking a game of checkers and you're making it three-dimensional chess, only to exclude people of color from participating in their voting system. I think this is a really interesting point. Why? Because the people affiliated with Reclaim Idaho, the smart professors at Boise State, the judges, the doctors, the dentists, the lawyers, they want ranked choice voting because they say the system you have currently is inequitable. And we all know what that means now, right? We're all on the same page, right? Inequitable, equity, as Kamala Harris said, equity, America's not an equitable country. What does that mean? It means it's racist, right? The way we vote is racist. And so here's this interesting wrinkle that some of the leading representative organizations for people of color in the country, including the NAACP, will tell you, ranked choice voting is actually discriminatory against people of color. Crazy. And one of their evidences is, as I mentioned earlier, the city of New York adopted ranked choice voting. And it turned out that 68% of black voters in New York City expressed one preference on the ballot. One preference. 68%. Black voters walked in the ballot box and they said, there are 8 candidates running, I don't care. I'm circling the one who's a Democrat. That's what we've done for decades. That's what we're going to keep doing. Okay, so it's not exactly more equitable, despite what they say. The next thing that they'll tell you in their support, and just to be clear, one of the things I was taught a long time ago by a mentor of mine is if you want to really understand something that you oppose, give it its most charitable interpretation. Okay? What is the most favorable thing we can say about it? Make that argument and then take it apart. Okay, so that's what we're doing here tonight. So the first thing that they say is, well, you don't have to express all of your preferences. Explain that to the 60% of registered voters in Alaska who voted for a Republican. I mean, hold that thought. The second thing they'll say is, well, it's more equitable. And there's a lot of black politicians and advocacy organizations on the behalf of people of color who say it's actually not. The third thing that they'll say is this is a way of getting more civility in politics. More civility. People will talk nicer to each other because of ranked choice voting. And look, folks, if that's what you're looking for out of your voting system, my car's parked in the lot out there. I've got a unicorn. She's beautiful, right? I've got some special magic Pappy's elixir. It'll grow hair on your head if you're missing it. If that's what you're looking for from your voting system, is for people to talk nicer and to have more fair and open discourse. So this is a really interesting point. So Maine adopted ranked choice voting 3 cycles ago. Maine, and it's really come down to the 2nd district in Maine. Anyone who knows your electoral college politics knows that Maine assigns its electoral votes by congressional district. Those 2 votes were always kind of competitive, 2 to the 4 in Maine, because Republicans do quite well in the 2nd district of Maine. In fact, Republicans have held that seat, I think it's 10 of the last 12 election cycles. So to get at that disadvantage for Democrats, this is one of the arguments, they brought ranked choice voting. And it played out the same way ranked choice voting does in most places. The Republican was ahead on election night, and the next day he was leading with 48%. And then they went to the next rounds and he ended up losing 52% of the vote. Here's the interesting thing for this point about making it a fairer, more civil discourse. The candidates running in this new format called ranked choice voting, they tried to appeal to as many voters as possible. I'm not going to say anything critical about the current incumbent, it was Bruce Poliquin. I'm not going to say anything critical of Representative Young. Here's the interesting thing that happened. The candidates themselves were essentially empty vessels, blank canvases, didn't take a position on anything. You know who did? Third-party groups. They spent more money in negative advertising in Maine's 2nd congressional district than any other race, congressional race, that cycle. And it happened the next year in Maine. So the candidates themselves say nothing. But the third-party groups say, yeah, he's a unfaithful, money-grubbing vermin. Oh, and she's a real piece of work too. The advertisements on air, on radio, on TV, they continued. The nasty talk continued, and the amount of money that was spent actually went up. So if you think that ranked choice voting is going to make politics more civil, like I said, meet me outside. I've got a unicorn I can sell you for a real good price. Okay, so it doesn't make it more civil. The other argument that Justice Jones, who's one of the leading advocates for ranked choice voting here in Idaho, he'll say, is we are tired of having elections where a minority candidate, a minor candidate that does not receive 50+1% of the vote, wins the election. And most of you all can remember an example of this. My go-to is 2018, the race for lieutenant governor here in Idaho. Remember that election? Janice McGeehan won with about 28% of the vote. And remember there were about 5 candidates running here in Idaho? And they all had their own sort of regional constituency. They all came from slightly different parts of the Republican Party, and they split the vote almost evenly, 28, 24, 23, 18%. And the argument for a lot of people, they won't say this explicitly, but you can kind of read between the lines, is how do you stop a Janice McGeehan from ever being elected again? Well, you got to require them to get to 50% of the vote. And that's what ranked choice voting does, right? As I explained, you keep balloting, take off the low-performing candidates, reassign their votes until you get to 50%. The balloting keeps going until somebody clears that threshold. Let's go back to Alaska. Really interesting thing happened there. Like I said, you had 11,000 votes set aside. And Mary Peltola wins that seat. Imagine that. Republicans held that seat in Congress for over half a century. And there's a special election held under ranked choice voting. And as Senator Cotton says, he always says, Theo, make sure you put this in your speech. He's tweeted about this a lot. 60% of registered voters in Alaska, listen to what I said there. 60% of registered voters, not 60% of registered Republicans, 60% of registered voters in Alaska voted for a Republican candidate, and a Democrat won. Here's the crazy thing though. They'll say, well, ranked choice voting always makes sure that the person who wins got 50%. Here's a fascinating thing, and this is like I said, we're gonna have to do math. I hate math, you hate math, we all hate math. It'd be easier if the slide was here, I assure you. But you take those 11,000 votes that were cast for Nick Begich, and you put them back in to the total. Mary Peltola doesn't clear 50%. She won with 48.2% of the vote. And you know what's really interesting? When you know a lot of statistical geeky guys who study computer science and those kinds of things at MIT or CIT, a lot of my friends will tell me in the regressions they've done of ranked choice voting elections that have been held in this country. Remember, 2003 was the first one. We've had them in municipal jurisdictions in Utah, a county in Colorado, a number of cities in Massachusetts and California. This phenomenon that you see in Alaska happens again and again and again. So they tell you that ranked choice voting is important because you don't want a candidate that only appeals to a very narrow constituency winning because the vote is split up so many ways. You want to make sure the candidate gets to 50% of the vote. But that's not what the system produces. Fascinating, right? Okay, buckle up, because we're going into the hardest part of this discussion tonight. And it's something that none of those eggheads on the other side want to talk about. I would love to, a real egghead bout, but it's called the monotonacity theorem. Have anyone here who teaches math? Okay, monotonacity explained, layman's terms. Real simple thing. The thing that wins, if you add more of its winning ingredient, the theorem holds you should win by more. NASCAR. The car that wins, you give it a faster engine, you should win with a faster time. Racehorse, you make it stronger. The horse that won the Derby, you should win by more. How about this? Ranked choice voting. The candidate that wins the election, give them more votes. They should win by more, right? Uh-oh. Uh-oh. Turns out with ranked choice voting, that's not what happens. What do you mean? This is Theo Wold guy, he's crazy. You know basic math, bro? More votes, that person wins by more. Well, okay. A number of mathematical theorists at UCLA and the University of New Hampshire did this really interesting study on that special election in Alaska. And they took 5,000 votes That's what they started with. From Sarah Palin, who finished second. 5,000 votes from Sarah Palin. And they moved them over to Mary Peltola. You know who won that election? Nick Begich. What? How's that possible? He was eliminated in the first round. How did adding more votes from Sarah Palin to the winner result in a different winner? And as I said, unless you're the Delphic Oracle or a statistics geek and you're going to go down to Las Vegas and count cards and make $1 million, there is an accountability issue with ranked choice voting. And why? Because it operates on a mathematical algorithm. So you think, well, I don't want Palin, so I'm just going to vote for Begich because I certainly don't want a Democrat to win. Mathematically, it turns out if you wanted the Republican to win, you probably should have voted for the Democrat. Does that make any sense? Okay. So, we've gone through ensuring that there are no minority candidates, plurality vote share candidates. We've gone through, is it more equitable? We've gone through whether or not it makes discourse more civil. We've gone through the question of whether or not it actually produces what it says, which is you don't have to prefer or rank all candidates. It's an open system, just like the one you have today. The last couple points I want to give you, and then happy to take some questions. One of the really interesting things with ranked choice voting, the people who are supporting it, advocates of it, and look, I hope you give me, when you're thinking about this later and you evaluate what I've said, I hope you give me some credit because I didn't go to the easy, could have gone to the easy arguments here for you folks. My job here is to give you ammunition so that you can inform your neighbors, your family members, and explain to them why this is wrong. Right? Because the easy stuff is to tell you that Bernie Sanders supports ranked choice voting. Elizabeth Warren supports ranked choice voting. Eric Holder supports ranked choice voting. Okay? And I get accused of a conspiracy theorist, but they're not exactly hiding this. Go to fairvote.org. Fairvote has been pushing ranked choice voting for well over 3 decades. Check out their website. Lots of really informative videos, cool little cartoons to explain how easy ranked choice voting is. You know who pays for fairvote.org? You know who their largest contributor is? Oh, I heard it. I know, I'm not supposed to say that. Hey man, that's anti-Semitic. Hey, that's a conspiracy theory. The Open Society actually is the largest contributor to Fairvote. And what's better is if you go and look at the personnel and the bios of the folks who are writing these initiatives, who have come up with this theory, almost all of them at one point or another were employed by the Open Society, George Soros' philanthropic organization here in the United States. Okay, so to paraphrase scripture, judge a tree by its fruit, right? You want Eric Holder amending Idaho's election laws? If that's what you're for, this is the idea he has for you. Okay, so that's the easy argument. That's the easy stuff. The harder argument is to dismantle it piece by piece to explain to you why it doesn't actually achieve what it says it's going to achieve. Okay, so the last thing they say, and this is a little bit more political, philosophical, if you will. Ranked choice voting will eliminate extremism. Okay, it eliminates extremism. And this is one of those things that I really want to caution you all on. Because sometimes when you picture an extremist, you're thinking of the guy like in the hood with the eyes cut out, the whatever it may be, the person who runs into an abortion clinic with an AK or something. That's an extremist, right? Well, I imagine many of you here in this audience, I'll just make an assumption, are pro-life. It's a religious faith commitment for you. Maybe it's a political one. The view that an unborn child in the womb is entitled to protection under law is, for those who live in DC and New York and the fancy pants people who make a lot of the decisions for our government, that's an extremist position. It's an extremist position. You don't believe me? Look at the public polling on it. For those of you who actually exercise your right to bear arms, to keep and bear arms. I'm sure you're not surprised, many of you, but maybe you're surprised to find out that in what we call the Acela corridor, that's the train that Joe Biden always took to work, right? The fancy high-speed train that connects New York and Boston and Washington, D.C. In the Acela corridor, the idea that any American citizen would keep a weapon in their house and do so for any purpose other than hunting, that's an extremist view. Okay? For some of you who are teachers, who have children, who have grandchildren, if you teach a love for George Washington, the father of our country, or Thomas Jefferson, the author of that great instrument for human liberation, the Declaration of Independence, if you teach that those are men or ideas worth revering, I could spend all night giving you a roster of some of the most well-credentialed academics, intellectual elites in this country who would tell you that's an extremist view. George Washington and Thomas Jefferson were architects of a systemically racist system. They're no better than Yasser Arafat, terrorists. If you think they're heroes, that's an extremist view. So one of the leading arguments that Jim Jones and the Reclaim Idaho people will say is, this is how you get extremism out of Idaho politics. And what I want to leave you with is, when they are talking about extremists, they're talking about you. They're talking about you. So 2 last ideas. Go back and read your Madison. In the notes on the Constitutional Convention, this question of suffrage was raised a lot. Who should have it? How should we know that they should have it? Should it be earmarked to property? Is it all free men of a certain age? What age, right? And Madison's phrase that he repeats in the Constitutional Convention again and again is that the suffrage is the most delicate part of a free republic. It's delicate. Getting it right is very hard. And we know that. We wrestled with that as a country for years until we extended the suffrage beyond just white property-owning men to other parts of our society. Here's the thing. Our solution to the delicate balance of suffrage has always been simplicity. Keep it simple, stupid. Right? And the Idaho Constitution had this in the territorial constitution and at statehood, still there today, and I love it. It says, how do you know who's the next governor? The guy with the most votes. The guy with the most votes. There could be 56 candidates running, and he gets 13.5% of the vote. That's the winner. It could be the gal who gets 64% of the vote, and she gets 8,000 more votes than her next competitor. That's your next governor. Simplicity. And why? Why do we want simplicity? Accountability. All right? Right? A friend of mine always says, Theo, you got to use this, you got to use this. You really break it down and use this metaphor. Okay, so he says, after the 2020 election, we all, in one way or another, are now wising up to the idea that we got something wrong with the foundation of our elections, the house that is elections in this country. We need to do some repointing of the bricks. We need to go in there and maybe actually lay a new slab. There's something wrong with the foundation. What has ranked choice voted? I got solar tiles for a new roof. And put a new roof on the house. No. We got foundational problems. Because think of it, if you like what you saw in Fulton County, and you like what you saw in Madison County, or in Wayne County in Michigan, and you want those faceless, nameless bureaucrats who do the tabulation to have more power, ranked choice voting is a system for you. Because as I said, there's a computer algorithm that runs most of the tabulation. When they had to unpack the mistakes in Oakland Unified School District, how long did it take them? 4.5 weeks. You know why? They had to run the whole election over again. You can't just say, oops, we think the mistake happened in the second round. No, you gotta go all the way back to the start and do it again. So what does that mean? Well, as you all know from the 2000 election with hanging chads and all of that, the possibility of a hand recount, as is required under the Idaho state constitution, becomes really problematic, because how are you going to recount a computer algorithm? Yeah. Okay, the last thing I'll leave you with. This idea that you've got to have a majority of the vote, 50 plus 1%. No more extremist candidates. It'll be good for civil discourse. It produces an easy and straightforward outcome. And we don't want people who just get a tiny portion of the vote share in office. That's wrong. And Jim Jones will go so far as to say it's anti-democratic, because the winner of an election should represent the vast majority of voters, not just a small portion. All right, do your history. Let's go back in time. There was a guy, he was famous, not just in the United States, but all through the Western world. The press revered him. He was one of the leading orators of his day. Little guy, but his ascent in public office in the nation was considered to be essentially a coronation march. Even Queen Victoria said in one of her communications with Prime Minister Disraeli, he will make a fine American president. And he ran for president. And it was a six-way field. A bunch of minor candidates representing different regional constituencies. And he went up against one of these minor candidates, was a two-bit lawyer who had served a relatively unimportant tenure in Congress, not really known by anyone outside of backwoodsmen and some of the less than fortunate clients he represented in the law. And that guy ran on a very simple platform. No new tariffs, no to polygamy, and no more human enslavement. And he was called a radical, an extremist, despised by the New York press, hated by everyone in Washington, D.C. Who is this creep? He's going to tear the country apart. His views are so radical. And that two-bit lawyer, maybe the votes kind of showed it. I don't know. I like to think not, but he only got 40% of the vote. So he didn't meet Jim Jones's magic threshold of 50% plus one vote. But I don't know about you, but I am eternally grateful that Abraham Lincoln was elected the 16th president of the United States. Thank God we had an extremist who polled 40% of the vote. What's my point? We've had first past the post, and it's worked relatively well for us. Judge Douglas was famous. Queen Victoria said he would be a great president. Thank God Judge Douglas was not elected president of the United States. 40% of the vote is not an indictment. In some cases, it can be a godsend. Okay? So if you want more accountability, you want more integrity in your system, you want more control as the average voter, don't vote for some complicated Rube Goldberg rat trap that was designed by computer science professors in California. There's a simple solution, right? Simple solution. And the best part of Idaho, we have 62% turnout consistently. And some people may say that's not high enough. It's 13% higher than people in Washington. It's almost 19% higher than those who vote just down the river here in Oregon. 10 points higher than Montana, consistently, year after year, decade after decade, 62% of Idahoans turn out and vote in polls. There are no, not that I'm aware of, not yet, there are no P.O. boxes where 3,000 Somalis have cast votes, not like in Minneapolis, back in the 2006 Senate race there. There have been no hanging chads, no judicial reviews. You got a pretty clean system. So I'll end here. Like Yogi Berra said, if it ain't broke, don't break it.